Yes, you're now live, Chair.
Good evening and welcome to this virtual planning control meeting that's being conducted with members and officers at various locations, communicating via audio, video and online. It's also the opportunity for the public and press to listen and view the proceedings via our YouTube channel. Before the meeting starts, I'd like to invite the committee member and scrutiny officer to explain how proceedings will work and to confirm that members, officers and registered speakers are in attendance.
Thank you, Chair. Good evening, members, officers and registered speakers. I'll start the meeting by completing a roll call. Councillor Brown.
Here.
Thank you. Councillor Allen is currently absent. Councillor Bryant.
Present.
Thank you. Councillor Derbyshire.
Present.
I've received apologies from Councillor Hewson, and this evening Councillor Ian Mantle will be subbing.
Present.
Thank you. Councillor Hunter.
Present.
Thank you. Apologies for absence have been received from Councillor David Levitt, and Councillor Michael Muir is due to sub, but he has notified committee services that he may not be able to, so apologies have been received from Michael Muir as well. Apologies have been received from Councillor Ian Moody. Councillor Ningwala is currently absent. Councillor Prendergast.
Here.
Thank you. Councillor Rice.
Present.
Thank you. And Councillor Tyson.
Yes, I'm here.
Thank you. In terms of officers, Simon Ellis.
Here.
Thank you. Sam Dakoko.
Here.
Thank you. Nurinata Katavu.
Present.
Thank you. And Anna Gouveia.
Present.
Thank you. And members of the public, I have Councillor Langley.
Present.
Thank you. Councillor Morris.
Yes, sir.
Thank you. And Councillor Burns.
Good evening, President.
Thank you very much. And as always, I'll just go through proceedings for this evening. The meeting is being streamed live on the Council's YouTube channel and Zoom. If live stream fails, the meeting will adjourn. If the live stream cannot be restored within a reasonable period, then the remaining business will be considered at a time and date fixed by the Chair. If the Chair does not fix a date, the remaining business will be considered at the next ordinary meeting. If for any reason the meeting is not quorate, an officer will notify attendees by interjecting the meeting, and the meeting will adjourn immediately. Once the meeting is quorate, the meeting will resume. If connection cannot be restored within a reasonable period, then the remaining business will be considered at a time and date fixed by the Chair. If the Chair does not fix the date, the remaining business will be considered at the next ordinary meeting. If a remote member loses connection, the Chair may adjourn the meeting for a short period to enable connection to be re-established. If the Chair does not adjourn the meeting, the member will be deemed to have left the meeting at the point of failure and deemed to have returned at the point of re-establishment. Only members present for the entirety of a debate and consideration of an item are entitled to vote. If technology fails for a member of the public who intends to participate and is unable to do so, the Chair may decide to adjourn or proceed to the next item of business to allow for connection to be re-established. If connection cannot be restored within a reasonable period, then the Chair can decide to conclude the remaining business. If a member or member of the public drops out of the meeting and is unable to connect by video, an email has been sent with telephone options. The same rules apply in terms of rules of debate and voting. Voting will be via green tick for yes, red cross for no, or blue hand for abstain. And details of how members voted will not be kept or minuted unless, of course, a recorded vote is requested or an individual requested their vote be recorded. And the committee member and scrutiny officer, which is me this evening, will clearly state the result of the vote, and the Chair will then proceed to the next agenda item. And if there is the tied vote, the Chair will have the casting vote. And that's all the information. Is there any questions before we start? No, thank you. I hand back to the Chair then. Thank you.
Thank you. So item 1, apologies for absence. We've received apologies from Mike Hewson, who and Councillor Ian Mantle is subbing for him. We've received apologies from Councillor David Levitt. Michael Muir was due to sub from him, but but he did say that he may not be able to make it. So we've received apologies from Councillor Michael Muir, and we've also received apologies from Councillor Ian Moody. Item 2, notification of other business. I have none. Item 3, Chair's announcements. Audio recording. So in accordance with Planning Control Committee policy, this meeting is being audio recorded as well as filmed. The audio recordings will be available to view on ModGov and the film recording via the NHDC YouTube channel. Declarations of interest. Members are reminded to make declarations of interest before an item. The detailed reminder about this and speaking rights is set out under Chair's announcements on the agenda. To clarify matters for the registered speakers, members of the public have 5 minutes for each group of speakers, i.e. 5 minutes for objectors and 5 minutes for supporters. There is also an additional 5 minutes available to any member advocates. A bell will sound at 4.5 minutes to alert you that you have 30 seconds left. And at 5 minutes, another bell will sound to signify that you must stop speaking. Item 4, public participation. So we have 3 registered speakers tonight, and they've already been confirmed as being present during the roll call, and I will call them at the relevant time. So let's move on to item 5.
Chair, sorry to interrupt you. I just noticed that Councillor Allen has joined. If I could just quickly confirm he can hear us and we can hear him.
I can, and I hope you can.
Yeah, that's fine. Sorry, Chair, over to you.
That's okay. I noticed too. I should have said something. Okay.
Apologies for lateness.
Item 5, 20/01605/PIP, Mill Corner Farm, Jackson's Lane, Reed, Royston, Hertfordshire, SG8 8AB. This is an application for permission in principle, erection of 7 dwellings. I understand that permission in principle, this is the first time one of these has come to the planning committee. It's a relatively new thing. And I'm sure our officer will explain a bit more about that. So I'm going to invite Sam DeCoco to present this item.
Good evening all. I hope you can hear me okay. Are the made available? Okay. So first slide, please. Next slide. So as you can see here, this is the site. It is important to note at this point, in regards to the site, you can see a green line running almost parallel to Jackson's Lane. That is the extent of the conservation area. So anything south of that line is within the conservation area. North of that line is outside of the conservation area. Could we go to the next slide, please? So this is the site location plan. Members will notice that this is the only document that has any information on the site. This is by reason of the application type. So permission in principle is a very stringed back method of planning permission. The considerations are limited to the land use, the location, and the amount of development. Those are the only considerations. All the technical details are reserved for a future application. So we are purely looking at whether the land use is appropriate in this location for the amount of development that is proposed, in this case, up to 7 units. I've got a few updates before I go any further. So I must note in my report under the representations, particularly from CPRE, there's a small typo where I wrote, I believe, the absence of the 5-year land supply does supersede local plan policies. It's meant to read the absence of a 5-year land supply does not supersede local policies. So my apologies for that. We've also had a late representation from the Historic Environment team at Hertfordshire County Council. No objection to the principle of the development, that is the principle of the use, the location and the amount of development purely in terms of the historic environment, but with recommendations for technical details. So it has no significant impact on my report or recommendations. Okay, can we go on to the next slide, please? I'll start with, these are my photographs of the site. This is a view of the rear of the site from an open access point on the joint. You can see in the distance there, for context, that is the adjoining property Vine Cottage that you can see almost in the centre of the screen. Next slide, please. Here we have the view of the front of the property on Jackson's Lane from the west looking eastwards. Next slide, please. This is the opposing view of the front of the property from, again, on Jackson's Lane. This is from the east looking west. Next slide, please. This is a photograph, again, of the front of the site on Jackson's Lane, and this is from the pedestrian entrance to the school on the other side of Jackson's Lane. Next slide, please. I've got a few internal shots. So this is a photograph of the site from just inside of the site, just behind the trees and the vegetation facing onto Jackson's Lane. And this is a group of trees positioned relatively centrally towards the front of the site onto Jackson's Lane, which are covered by the conservation area. Next slide, please. This is, again, a view from just inside of the site, just in front of the vegetation onto Jackson's Lane. And this is looking towards the northwest of the site. And then final slide, please. This is another photograph looking northwards from just in the site of Jackson's Lane along the eastern boundary of the site. I'm not going to assume the report's been read. I've recommended refusal for 3 reasons, and I'm happy to take any questions you have in regards to my recommendation for refusal or the method of application.
Thank you, Sam. Do members have any immediate questions for our officer? Okay, so in that case, I'm going to move on to our first registered speaker, which is Councillor Ken Langley, who's the chairman of Reed Parish Council. You have 5 minutes to explain your objection. Thank you.
Thank you, Madam Chair, members. Reed Parish Council, in its written submissions, has presented many planning reasons, including from the national framework, why this application should be refused. And these planning reasons have been reinforced with great professional authority by Mr. De Coco's officer's report recommending refusal. We in Reed urge you to act on that recommendation. That report has the complete support of my parish council and most of the community in Reed. 43 villagers in a population a little over 300 have taken the trouble to send in written objections, and they did so under considerable difficulties imposed not just by the COVID restrictions, but also by the limited time for consultation allowed by the, new to us certainly, planning route chosen by the applicant. Chair, let me just emphasise, this site is demonstrably unsuitable as a location for housing in Reed. It's not needed for housing in Reed. Building on the site will irretrievably damage the character and beauty of our village and harm heritage in Reed. Further considerations. Firstly, it's material that this application is hostile to your emergent local plan. That plan, following democratic consultation in 2013 and 2016, has the full support of Reed Parish Council and our community. We fully accept our status as a Category A village, and with it a measure of appropriate housing growth. Indeed, it was my parish council which requested the incorporation into the Reed settlement boundary in 2013 of 2 sites for significant housing growth. One of 12 houses has been developed already since 2016 by the present applicant. The other is available for a mix of up to 22 dwellings in the period of the emergent plan. As a village, we are completely aligned with your submitted plan, and we therefore ask you to defend both your plan and our village together by opposing what we see as an inappropriate development, one that is certainly outside the proposed settlement boundary for Reed. A further point, members should be aware that Reed is already making a more than proportionate contribution to district housing need. In 2011, we were 134 houses. Today, we're 149. And that's an 11% growth rate in a village which has a first school, but no shop, no open pub, and a legitimately allocated further site for up to 22 more houses. And thirdly, as the officer's report brings out, building on the application site would irretrievably change the distinctive character of Reed. It would harm the conservation area and damage the beauty and heritage value, which is a precious asset of our village. These features are very eloquently described in paragraph 4.3.13 of your officer's report. And it's these features that villagers want to see protected, even as we accept the growth I referred to earlier. Lastly, let me emphasize how important it is that members refuse this application at the first permission in principle stage of the applicant's chosen planning route. This application should fail because this location in Reed is intrinsically unsuitable in planning and other terms for housing development. I quote from the officer's report. Whilst the amount of development could be subject to change at the behest of the planning authority, the land use would fundamentally alter the character of the location from open countryside and agrarian in character, which no technical details at stage 2 of the process could overcome. End of quote. Madam Chair, I therefore ask members to refuse this application at this permission in principle stage, and in doing so, believe that you will be upholding consulted on plan-led development and opposing opportunistic and inappropriate development here in Reed and probably elsewhere in the district. Madam Chair, thank you.
Thank you. Do members have any questions for our speaker? I'm not seeing any hands up. I'm seeing nods of the head, so I assume not. So thank you very much for taking your trouble to come and speak to us. So now I'd like to welcome our second speaker, Councillor Gerald Morris, who's speaking as a member advocate. You have 5 minutes.
Thank you very much, Chair. Good evening. I'm going to speak to you in support of the officer's recommendation to refuse this application. The officer has comprehensively covered the technical planning reasons for refusal, and I therefore think it's unnecessary for me to repeat what no doubt you have read and heard in his report and recommendation. However, I do wish to comment on what I believe is the incredibly poor timing of this application. There is clearly no great urgency for this property developer to build on this agricultural land beyond Greenbelt. So why now, in the middle of a national and no doubt for many, a personal crisis? However, in spite of this, the agent and or the applicant chose to submit this planning in principle application. The committee will be aware that a PIP application is a shortcut method to try and easily obtain initial planning consent. Because of the short time officers have to determine a PIP application, this is inevitably then reduces the time that concerned villagers and the parish council have to consider and comment on the application. And this is, of course, somewhat undemocratic. Quite frankly, I find it disappointing, to say the least, that we are in the midst of the largest crisis that most of us have experienced in our lifetime. Furlough is coming to an end, and who knows what our future holds, and yet we're being forced to comment on this application. NHDC officers are having to work from home and until recently not permitted to visit application sites. Communications are difficult and the parish council and villagers have to meet via Zoom. As I have said, the officer's report and recommendation covers the technicalities. I believe it is the right decision to refuse this hostile application. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor. Do members have any questions for Councillor Morris? Okay, then we have no further speakers. So we do not have an applicant speaking in support. So I will move then to, oh no, I need to ask if you've got any questions of our officer, or if our officer wants to come back on anything. Do you want to?
I have no further comments.
No further comments. Okay, let's move to debate then. Would anybody like to speak? Councillor Tony Hunter.
Thank you, Chairman. I find this quite simple to support our officer's recommendation, in fact. But I think the concern for me is PIP only came into existence in 2018, which speeds up a planning application whereby our officers have literally 5 weeks to determine. I think Mr. Ellis is with us this evening. I'm wondering whether this is the first of many, but I'm quite happy in this particular instance and believe that substantial harm to this heritage asset as far as Reed is concerned and the character of the landscape, I think our officer has summed it up quite succinctly, that I'd actually propose his recommendation. But I'd like Mr. Ellis to actually answer, is this the first of many PIPs he thinks we might see? Because it's the first one I have.
Okay, thank you, Councillor Hunter. I'll ask Simon to respond to that in a moment. First of all, I have Councillor Derbyshire.
Much the same as what Councillor Hunter has just said, and I'm happy to second the proposal.
Okay, we have a proposer and a seconder. Is there anybody else who would like to speak on this? No. Okay, Simon, would you like to respond to the question about permission in principle?
Yes, thank you, Chairman. As far as I'm aware, we haven't received any others at all. We don't have any current permission in principle applications, but I think if you look at the white paper, the intention is that they want to build on this model, and this will be the sort of route that we might see more common if the reforms that are presented in the white paper come to fruition in legislation. So building on the current system, I think we probably will see quite a few more of these over the next few months and years.
Thank you for responding to that. Let's move to the vote then. So we better get this right. So if you're voting yes, you're voting to accept the officer's recommendation, which is to refuse. If you don't think that's right and it should be granted, you vote no. So a yes is to refuse. So can we take a vote then? So looks to me like that's unanimously carried.
Yeah, so the application's refused. Yeah.
The application is refused. I think that's unanimous, isn't it? I think it was. Okay, thank you very much. So let's move on then to item 6, which is 20/01359 FPH, the Coach House, Hitchin Road, Kimpton, Hitchin, Hertfordshire, SG4 8EF. And this is for the erection of a residential annex or store following demolition of existing storage shed and garage, amended by plans received on 14th of August 20. And I'm going to invite Simon, our officer, to present this item.
Thank you, Chair, and good evening, everybody. I don't have any updates. There was a late representation that was sent to all members, but I think we do have a speaker now from the parish, so they'll probably update you on those points. So can I have the slides, please? Okay. Okay, thanks. That's the first slide. Right, that's the site plan, and you can see a cluster of lovely old houses there. The Coach House is the one on the application site, and then there's the old vicarage at the frontage there along Hitchin Road boundary, and then there's the old vicarage cottage just to the south of the application site, and you can see the bridleway that goes along the north, the sort of dirt track that goes along the north of the site on that one as well. Now the next slide, please. So this is a sort of angle, this is a panoramic photograph by the looks of it. This is a photograph taken from within the garden of the application site, and behind the table tennis table is the Coach House itself, and then to the right of the Coach House, the taller house is the old vicarage itself. Can I have the next slide, please? This is a photograph of the shed that's proposed to be demolished. Looks like a sort of wooden double garage. That's proposed to be demolished. And so this will be the position of the proposed new annex building in that location. Can I have the next slide, please? And that's a slightly wider view of the shed, so you can sort of orientate yourself now. If you think to the left is the Coach House at the bottom of the front of the garden, and then that's the location of the annex in there, nestled in with the hedgerow and the trees behind. Next photograph, please. That's a view from further into the garden. I think that might be from the balcony, actually, of the back of the Coach House, so you can get a bit of a view down into the garden and see, again, just where that very tidy looking bush is, just to the left of that, that's where the annex would be. Next slide, please. Oh no, that's the view from the balcony, so you can see down, and you can see the summer house there, which is in the old vicarage cottage. That's in the garden of that, so that would be sort of quite close to the position of the proposed annex. Next slide, please. So there you've got a view of the gap between where the shed is and then the boundary of the site. So that's the sort of corner where the new annex would be located. Go to the next slide. That's another view of that. So you can see the summer house there. So just to point out, though, planning rules are quite strange. That summer house there, you could convert that into an annex, and you wouldn't actually need planning permission to do that. It's only if you convert it into a separate dwelling do you need planning permission when you're dealing with existing outbuildings. But the proposal here is to demolish the existing outbuilding to create a new annex. So it's slightly different, but just bear in mind you are allowed to convert existing outbuildings in gardens to annexes, and that doesn't require planning permission. Next slide, please. That's the view of the frontage, the Coach House from the road entrance there. The next one, please. Again, that's the frontage of the Coach House with the old vicarage there to the left as well. And the next slide, please. That's a view from the bridleway I mentioned to the north of the site, the sort of track that goes along there. There's a little entrance there into the garden through the wall. So that's just a view of to the north of the site, sort of illustrating those big trees behind there. The annex will be tucked in just there. So the visual effect of it would be quite insignificant from the main public vantage point. I think that's the purpose of that photograph, just to show you what the view would be. If that would probably be the only way you could actually see it from the public bridleway, were it to be granted planning permission and were it to be constructed. Next slide, please. This is the floor plan of the existing buildings. So there's the double garagey shed type feature with another building behind it. Those would be demolished, and you can see the footprint and the elevations. They are quite small buildings, but generally speaking, replacing that with what's on the next slide. If you just take a look at that. Next slide, thanks. So you can see pretty much the same location, building mass, slightly greater than the existing buildings, but in reality, not much more of an impact than the existing buildings, which is why on balance, we've recommended it for approval, because although this site is in the green belt and a conservation area, our view is that's quite a well-designed building in the conservation area, would have a, probably a neutral impact on the conservation area, or maybe even an enhancement in terms of getting rid of those rather tatty wooden buildings. But in terms of green belt, not much greater massing and impact than existing buildings. So although, on a sort of volumetric calculation, you could probably argue that that's a bigger building than that's there at the present, and it certainly would be. But in terms of its impact on openness, I think it'd be very difficult to argue that that has a significant effect on the openness of the greenbelt compared to the existing buildings on site. So just to emphasise, that's why it's recommended for approval. And also to emphasise the point that if you do put an outbuilding, if there is an outbuilding in your garden, you can convert it to an annex, and that doesn't need planning permission. It only needs planning permission to be changed to use to a separate dwelling. This is not a proposal for a separate dwelling, it's a proposal for an annex. There's a condition on the recommendation, which is belt and braces, that says that it can only be used as an annex. That condition is probably strictly not even necessary, because that's not what's being proposed here. And if there was ever evidence that this were to be used as a separate dwelling with a separate household that had no relationship to the existing house, that's a material change of use, and that's a future proposal that would be considered now. So again, my advice would be that you wouldn't really be able to refuse planning permission because you're worried about it being a separate house. That's a separate issue which would come up again at a later date if that were to be the case. So that's the end of my updates and the end of the presentation. I'll take any questions. Thank you, Chair.
Do members have any immediate questions for our officer? No, I can't see any hands. In which case, I'd like to invite our speaker, Councillor Neil Burns, Chair of Kympton Parish Council, to speak in objection to this proposal. You have 5 minutes.
Good evening. If I may just first of all share with you my best wishes for Councillor John Bishop and his speedy recovery from his hospital visit this evening, which has prevented him from being here to make this case. I would first of all say that as a parish council, we try and always address these issues with a balanced view, and we're mindful of the needs of both individual and collective groups within the village, and we are trying to balance the desires of the occupants of Coach House with the concerns of members of the community in the near neighbourhood. We've received 11 objections to the planning application. We've received no notes of support for the application, to put it in context. And most of those objects have been on 2 issues. They've been over the concern for the significant ash tree that is shown on the photographs in the southwest corner of the site. And secondly, it's a concern over noise disturbance that will be caused by the entrance location to this new dwelling in the north facade of the building. If I just may say that I think your case officer has done a super job in explaining the background. There are a couple of things I would just emphasise, that this dwelling is of over 70 square metres in size. It is a size of a 2-bedroomed house. It's not an insignificant item. It's almost 5 metres high, and it is a extremely large shed. The concerns, though, aren't really about the bulk of the building and such like. The concerns are that the current plans, which have been modified, show that the significant ash tree, which is one of a group of ash trees in that location, is proposed to be retained, but the construction is actually within 2 feet of the trunk of that tree. And we are extremely concerned that no evidence or manner of work has been submitted by the applicant to demonstrate how that tree will be safeguarded. We would normally expect, and I've seen this in many other applications at planning stage, for some clear information demonstrating how that tree or a significant tree would be safeguarded to be provided. That has not been done in this case, and we are very unconfident and very uncomfortable that without that, that tree will suffer and will in the longer term die because of the actions that may be taken. And the second item is that the entrance for this significant dwelling is on the north facade of the building. It means that to get in and out of that building, you enter at the boundary to the neighbour's fence. It means that any arrival late in the evening or departure early in the morning will cause noise disturbance to the property behind the coach house. So we're not trying to stop the owners of this property from moving forward with some form of development, but what we would like to see is 2 things. We would like to see the actual structure moved further away from the ash tree, to give us confidence and to give the planning authorities confidence that the trees will be safeguarded, and would also like to see that the entrance, rather than being on the north facade, is on the east facade facing the existing house, such that any noise disturbance is mitigated and does not cause an unneighbourly feature to the dwelling. I think that's the principal points that we would like to say. I would just also make the issue that this extension would mean that the overall size of the extension that's taken place since 1948 have more than doubled the size of the original property. So there is significant growth allowed here. But those 2 points are the ones that we would ask the committee to take on board and apply. And also, we're concerned that this dwelling would be an ideal opportunity for someone to use as an Airbnb. We would therefore like a restriction placed that the property cannot be used for.
Your 5 minutes are up. I'm sorry.
That's fine.
I'm sorry. Thank you very much. Your 5 minutes are up. Do members have any questions for our speaker? I think I do. Oh, Ian Mantle has a question. I'll let you go first.
Sorry, I was having trouble getting to the right bit of the technology. I'm not absolutely clear why moving the entrance from the north to the east would affect the noise disturbance to the neighbouring property. I would have thought, if anything, it would make it worse.
Right, so if you can picture the drawing, that the entrance at the moment is through the gable end. That means that you will be at the boundary fence. You go to the boundary fence to then gain entrance to the new building. If it was on the east face, you would simply walk down the garden and go straight into the building. So you would be sheltered from the adjacent neighbour's garden by the building.
Do you mean the east side or the west?
I mean the east side, the side nearest the vicarage.
Yeah.
Does that not make sense to you, Ian?
Not really. I can't see how it makes any difference to the amount of noise.
Well,
not really with you.
The neighbour is on the west side.
No,
so
the neighbour's on the east. The vicarage and the vicarage.
No, that's not the sorry. Right, I must emphasise this. Sorry, the neighbours that have registered concern are on the west side of the property.
They're in that little cluster of
Right, so-
houses to the west.
Yes, they actually are on Church Lane. So it's because
Yeah, I know.
this annex is being constructed, proposed well away from the vicarage. It's at the
Yeah,
end of the
that's
vicarage
what I
garden. It's at the end of the coach house garden. It's
Yeah.
it's not a concern to those neighbours. It's a concern. It's at the end of the garden, and therefore it's a concern to the neighbours at the end of the garden. In
Understand.
fact, I've gone and viewed it. You know, it is literally it's a boundary fence over which you can.
I think I know.
Okay, thank you. Were there any other questions for our speaker? I just wanted to clarify about this access. So this annex will be accessed from the same point off the road as the current house. Is that correct?
That's correct.
Yeah. So you're not talking about a different access.
No, there's a slight misnomer referring to garages. They're not really garages. I don't think you could get a car into the area. It's at the end of a garden. There's a gateway onto the footpath, but there's no vehicular access.
Okay.
You could by pedestrian come directly down the footpath and come through the garden gate into the bottom of the garden adjacent to the proposed dwelling.
Okay, thank you very much. I think that clarifies that. Are there any further questions for our speaker?
Councillor Mantle, you've still got your hand raised. Do you wish to?
He's
You're on mute.
He's on mute. I think do you need to take your hand down?
Right, your hand's gone now, Councillor Mantle. I hope that's
okay.
Right.
Thank you. Thank you for coming to speak to us. I'd like to now move into debate. So who would like to speak?
Chair, can I just respond to one quick point?
Okay, I was going to invite you afterwards, but okay.
Sorry. What I'd suggest on the ash tree, just looking at condition 4, I think you could strengthen that condition. I think it could be worded along the lines of prior to commencement of development, the applicant shall submit a construction method statement to demonstrate any construction within the root protection zone of the ash tree, and to use methods of construction that would not harm the roots of the tree. So you can use like a pile and beam foundation. There's all sorts of well-known methods that you can use to prevent harm to the roots of the tree. To strengthen the condition, because the condition is worded at the moment just says don't harm the tree, whereas I think if we suggest that a construction method statement needs to be submitted, and identifying the root protection zone, identifying the construction method within that zone, and then any construction thereafter must be carried out in accordance with the approved details. That would probably strengthen the protection and perhaps address some of those concerns about how the construction itself might harm the tree, which can be retained. That's just a suggestion. Chair.
Okay, thank you for that suggestion. Can you confirm that it is only 2 feet from the building? Is that correct? But maybe you can come back a bit later with an answer.
Sorry, I can quote the exact dimensions. It's if you want, are we in metric or are we in imperial?
You said 2 feet. Is that exact?
Yes, it's depending on which. It's 600 millimeters from the eaves. It's 700 millimeters from the actual walls because the eave sticks out more.
Okay, thank you for that.
700 millimeters is not far away from 2 foot. It's
Okay, thank you for that. I've got Councillor Rice who would like to speak.
Thank you, Chair. Could I ask the officer whether we could get a TPO added to that to protect it in the future?
I don't see why not, but I'm going to ask our officer to respond to that.
The site is in the conservation area, so there would need to be a separate consent for any tree works. But if members felt particularly strongly about that, we could certainly look at belt and braces with the extra control on the conditions, and then we could serve a specific, we could look at the tree and then serve a TPO if it's felt that that extra protection is needed. We could certainly look at that.
Thank you very much. Is there anyone else who would like to speak? Okay. Well, oh, I've got Councillor Tony Hunter.
Thank you, Chairman. It's an interesting one because normally you don't need a TPO when you've got a actual conservation area, but I do understand Mr. Ellis's thinking, and it is very much belt and braces. Reference the ash tree. I did look at this quite strongly because it's 55% bigger than the actual current dwelling sheds, I should call them. But in all honesty, I could not actually see a material planning reason that I could go to an inspector and actually say this should not be developed. So I'm going to actually recommend the officer's recommendation with these amendments to the conditions, especially prior to the commencement concerning the construction method statement and the actual tree.
Okay, thank you, Councillor Hunter. Can I just remind members that it is within the green belt? So its development within the green belt, it is 55% larger than the current building. So I think there are grounds, if members were minded to refuse, there are grounds to refuse. And is there anybody who would like to second Councillor Hunter's proposal? I've got Councillor Allen. Councillor Allen, I think you might have frozen. Oh dear. Oh, are you back with us?
I'm with you, just struggling on the tablet. I do apologise. Very happy to second.
Okay, thank you. So we have a proposer and a seconder. I've got Councillor Rice who would like to speak.
I was going to second.
Okay, is there anybody who would like to contribute to any further debate? No. In which case we have a proposer and a seconder to accept the officer's recommendation, which is to grant. So let's go to the vote. Okay. I think that is carried.
That's carried, Chair, yeah.
Okay, thank you very much. So now I'd like to thank our speaker, and you don't need to stay if you don't wish to, and move on to invite our officer to update us on any of the planning appeals and decisions, and also about the forthcoming planning training. So Simon, over to you.
Oh, thank you, Chair. I don't have any more updates on appeals, but the planning training, we've now got confirmed dates, and it's the 30th of September for Chair, Vice Chair, Exec members, which is a slightly different session, because you remember the peer review suggested that you have slightly more in-depth session for chairs and vice chairs. And then there's two other dates, which I will just get up. I think there's been invites sent out, and we've already had a few acceptances. The other, we've tried to avoid council meetings. The council calendar is quite busy, isn't it, in October? There's one for the 6th of October at 7 p.m, and that's open to all members. And there's one for the, is it the 3rd and the 30th of October, open to all members. And it's going to be run by the Planning Advisory Service and also a member peer from another local authority who's going to lots of experience of dealing with some of the stuff that this committee will be dealing with over the next few months. So it should be very helpful. And so 2 sessions to all members and then 1 specific session on the 30th of September. And that's all been sent out.
Thank you very much. Can I encourage all members of this planning committee to attend that session if at all possible? It may be recorded, but of course that won't be the same as being there. And can I also ask you to encourage the members of your groups to come, because you never know when you might have to present as a member advocate, and it's important to understand a little bit about the planning process in order to do that well. As we've seen tonight, we've had a member advocate, and often we do. So if you haven't booked in already, please do, and encourage your other group members to do so. I've got Councillor Hunter's raised his hand. Is that because you didn't take it down?
Yes, Chairman. Mr. Ellis said the 6th and the 30th. I've got it logged as the 6th and the 28th. I just wanted to check.
Yeah, 30th of September is for chairs and exec members. The 6th,
oh, right. Okay.
Yeah.
Understood.
The 6th and the
28th.
28th.
It is 28th of October, yes.
The 20th of October.
Yeah, sorry, yeah, 28th. I did say 30th of October. Tony's right.
Yeah, 26th and 28th of October. And can I just, unless in case Matthew hasn't seen it, Sue Nguala has sent her apologies.
Yeah, thank you. I received that. Thank you,
Yeah,
Chair.
you've received that. Okay. So I think unless there's anybody else needs to say anything, I think I will close the meeting at 8:22. That was a short one. So see you again in October.